And as Lance said, I am in the watershed planning group. I am the Fountain Creek Watershed Project Manager. So all things Fountain Creek is where I live. And this is a tour of this is a story map, and basically it's a mapping tour of our geomorphology monitoring that we do on Fountain Creek. And geomorphology simply means the form of dirt. And we sometimes call fluvial geomorphology, which means the shape of dirt shaped by water. So that's what we're covering today. And we do a lot of analysis on Fountain Creek, and geomorphology is one of our important ones to make sure that the creek is in a healthy place. So this all started, our geomorphology started back in 2012, and we
Has everybody else lost Annie's sound?
Yes.
Yes, I did.
Okay,
I did.
Annie, I don't know if you can hear us, but it seems like you lost the sound from you.
Did I lose you, Lance?
Yeah, we're good now. I can hear you now.
Okay, you still see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. Yeah, this is gonna be a challenge today, guys. Sorry, internet's struggling. So we are doing these 10 different reaches up and down Fountain Creek. To begin with, here's a little bit of background on our Fountain Creek watershed. It drains about 925 square miles, and this makes it a medium watershed for Colorado. We get about 15 inches of precipitation a year, and though this is a medium watershed in Colorado, it is home to 13% of our total population. So that's a large population center on a very small creek. It is one of the most dynamic watersheds in all of Colorado because it has an elevation of 14,000 feet all the way down to 4,600 feet, which is a change of over 9,000 feet in elevation, which is really unique in this area and to Colorado. It also has been home to some of our most notable events of the Waldo Canyon fire in 2012 and our Black Forest fire in 2013. There was major flooding on Fountain Creek in 2013 and 2015, which was exacerbated by those forest fires that we had. This is just an overview map of our geomorphology sites. There's again 10 of them from the south of Colorado Springs here all the way down to Pueblo, and this is just where they lay in the scheme of things in Colorado. This here is a dynamic map where we can actually go in and explore the sites a little bit more. Each of these sites is different from each other in like what they're looking at and the size and scope of the site. So they're either 19 to 115 acres. They do everything from urbanization in Colorado Springs and Pueblo to prairie in the area between Colorado Springs and Pueblo. Fountain Creek Basin is in the low gradient Colorado Piedmont Providence. And this is notable with highly erodible soils and alluvial deposits. And then underlain by sedimentary rocks. Land cover in this basin is mostly arid grassland and prairie. And the morphology is characterized by this geology, which means the creek likes to meander back and forth in the sand and constantly moves. The channel is prone to braiding along several areas of the reaches. And braiding is where it'll have multiple small channels instead of one straight confined channel. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this map, and if you want to, we can come back to it. But this map is where you can zoom around and understand the different areas of Fountain Creek here. We have various sites, such as these little dots you see here are USGS monitoring gauges. So on this map, you can get an understanding for when you see a geomorphology site. And then here is a USGS biological monitoring site. Here's the flow gauge. Here's another geomorphology site, and so on. So you can see that these geomorphology sites are nice and interspersed. The USGS gauges are interspersed with our geomorphology sites. And we are going to look at some of these sites in more detail. I'm just scrolling down through the watershed here. Now we're entering Pueblo, and you will see things get quite busy in Pueblo. We have a couple monitoring gauges up here. And then we also have a bunch of geomorphology sites down here in the urban corridor of Pueblo. Sorry, I hit a extraction there. Okay, so moving down, these are going to be some more focused areas on some of our sites. And don't worry, we're not going to go through all 10, it's just a couple of them. This one's going to be interesting a little bit later, and this is why I wanted to highlight this one. This is site number 2, and it's located in Fountain. Here is Santa Fe Avenue right here, and the creek comes down and goes right under the train tracks and into this area. The pictures on the left show, this first picture is downstream looking to the south. And this picture was taken right at the point of the sandbar, like right kind of in the middle of this sandbar right here. And then this right here is an example of erosion and exposed shale. And this can be a problem for Fountain Creek and actually for most of Colorado. Shale also has a lot of selenium in it. And selenium is naturally occurring and it has a lot of benefits, but selenium in high concentrations is detrimental to aquatic life as well as farming and crops and things of that nature. So selenium is something we're always concerned about and always taking a look at. And here, this bluish gray that you can see right here is the bedrock actually, and it is composed of shale, which has that selenium in it. So it's sites like this that we're concerned about because it could be adding selenium to our system. Site 3, this is a cool site. It is located, we call it exit 123, and this is actually on our Clear Springs Ranch. And there's a trailhead that goes from Clear Springs Ranch right down to this geomorphology site. So the caretaker's house is right here, and you can actually walk right by this site and see it. The other interesting thing is it has this fish passage, which is the top picture here. And at the very top part of Clear Springs Ranch here, I'm going to try to zoom in. Hopefully my internet's not lagging too bad. We have a USGS monitoring site, and then here is this fish passage right here. And there's actually an interpretive bench and everything else like that, where you can view wildlife, birds, and then check out this really interesting fish passage. This next year, this dam portion over here will be actually redone and improved somewhat. It's time for, it's reached the end of its lifespan, so this will be redone in the next year or two. And this fish passage was put in because there's a huge diversion. The Owen Hall diversion is right here, and it has a senior water right. So the fish passage was added to help, mitigate and not prevent fish from being able to pass upstream. This is some pictures of the site. Let me come back down to give a little more of a reference. You can do it, internet. Where'd it go? I'll let that load while I talk about pictures. There it is. So this is our site. This first picture is looking upstream. This second picture is looking straight across the stream, and the third picture is looking downstream. And I took this right at the very middle of this geomorphology site. And this again is another classic example of these sandbars that like to form, and the stands of trees that kind of accumulate. So you'll have the braided sand channel, you'll have grass, then you'll have willows, and then you go up into the cottonwoods. And this is a prime example of the classic geomorphology of Fountain Creek on this section. Moving onward, site 5, this is a really cool site. It is very diverse, it's very dynamic, it's also very large. Zoom in just a little bit here. Again, you can, the pictures on the left here, this was taken again right about the middle of this geomorphology site. And here we have, again, looking upstream, we have looking downstream, and this interesting downstream is where a new channel is actually forming. This was not here a couple years ago, so a new channel is beginning to form downstream. And this is also located below Fountain Creek Flood Control and Greenway District Restoration Project. So we're hoping to use this geomorphology sampling site or monitoring site to actually evaluate a stream restoration project that happened right upstream here. Hope you guys can see this. I will zoom in a little bit. Right here is where the restoration project happened, was this area right here. You can see that the creek was completely out of phase and it was going kind of wacky, and it was also eating into this hayfield right here. So they did a restoration project right here, and hopefully this geomorphology site will indicate that that was a successful project. Site 6 is another very large site and classic prairie Fountain Creek geomorphology. Looking downstream here, there's some abutments that go across the bridge, across the creek from an old bridge. Here also, this site has a lot of examples of these small arroyos that form. And these are really common, like these small arroyos form from very small micro drainages coming off a hayfield or a hillside or something like that. And they're not too much of a problem, but if you have a really big rainstorm, it can wash a lot of sand and sediment into the creek, which just adds to sedimentation and turbidity and things like that. So these are very common in southern Colorado here. Here's another view of the upstream of the reach. And again, there's this classic geomorphology preference to braiding. There's a land cover of grasses that leads to willows, that leads to stand of cottonwood trees on the outskirts of where the flood-prone area is. We are going to jump all the way down to Pueblo now. And this is where the geomorphology starts to change a little bit. And it changes because, of course, in Pueblo, it's an urban area like Colorado Springs, and the channel is somewhat constricted due to the urbanization. These reaches are much straighter, and straighter sounds great, but they can also move more sediment that way because the water can speed up. It's not slow and dropping sediment out. So these kind of areas we really want to watch for flooding. The vegetation is a little bit more grass dominated, and then there's some willows and tamarisk in the terraced areas. And then again, on the outskirts of the flood prone areas are some cottonwood trees. So this is looking downstream, upstream at the Highway 50 bypass. That's right up here in the distance. And again, you can see the braiding in the sandbars. This picture right here was taken about right in the middle of this geomorphology site. And this is a common example of lateral bank erosion that happens in this area. So the creek comes along and erodes laterally at the base of the bank. And the vegetation is holding the bank, but it kind of curls over and then it sloughs off. So this is an example of where grass and vegetation is so important in managing floods and erosion and things of this nature, because this grass really helps keep the bank in place, and then eventually a chunk will fall off and then it'll rebuild again. So this is just some debris, some flood debris that accumulates from time to time, large woody debris right here. And Stockyard, this is the very last geomorphology site, and it's right at the confluence of the Arkansas River and Fountain Creek. The interesting thing here in this picture, it's hard to see, but way off in the distance is Pikes Peak, and we're looking right up to the north. But here's a pilot project actually looking to capture sediment and actually control sedimentation going into the Arkansas River. It has been effective, but it needs maintenance. Again, as sediment builds up, it has to be removed. And then here is looking downstream towards the confluence of the Arkansas River. And again, you can see the successional canopy of grasses to willows to cottonwood trees. So that is the sites themselves. To get into the meat and potatoes and actual geomorphology data collection, this is how we do it. And if you guys have any questions on this, please just pipe in and interrupt me. Is what we used to do. It's changed this year, which I'll get into that in a second. They would use what's called real-time climatic global navigation. And people would go out, a crew of 4 people would go out and take a GPS, and literally every 3 feet, take a GPS point. It would go up, it would go down, and that's what you're seeing on this map right here. That's every single one of those dots is a GPS point. And these GPS points were then added into ArcGIS, and you can generate a digital elevation map, or a DEM. And this is what a DEM looks like. So elevations of high areas are kind of the white to brown, and areas of low elevation are that kind of teal color. And you can see in here that on this particular site, the higher elevation is upstream, and then it moves to lower elevation. And this is how we monitor our geomorphology. But the DEM is nice, and it lets us know what the elevation is, but that's really good to know. But we also want to know, what is Fountain Creek doing? How is Fountain Creek changing over time? So this is what we do. It's called a elevation change map. And basically we took a DEM from 2015 and a DEM, this happens to be 2019, and we literally subtract the change between the two. And GIS is very good at doing this kind of thing. And so if you look to over here at the left, it'll tell you what everything is. The high changes are red, and degradation is that's red. So you can see here, interestingly enough, as time has gone on and the creek has changed, you see the channel used to be right here, this very red part, which is deposition. So basically the creek added a lot of sedimentation and deposition, and it naturally wanted to flow and move over here, and now it's degrading and eroding right here. So this is how we can actually monitor and see the creek move across the bed, going across the prairie here. And what we mostly are looking for on these changes, there's other things, but on the whole, erosion and deposition will always happen. Fountain Creek is a hungry creek. It likes to move sediment. It's its job to move sediment. But we want it to move sediment, but we also want it to deposit sediment as well. So we're kind of looking at a balance between how much red and how much blue do you see. And if you have some red, that's great. If you have some blue, that's better. That means it's balanced. We don't want to see a geomorphology where it's all red or all blue or something else like that. So this is how we're monitoring change over time. And it's been fascinating year over year to watch the creek in this area just kind of move over across the prairie. Does anybody have any questions on that? Nope. Okay. So this is the cool part of this presentation. Another thing I'm trying to understand is where, the history of Fountain Creek. So I'm going to go back and kind of talk about Colorado Springs utilities and what Colorado Springs, the city, has done over the years. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but 80% of Colorado Springs water comes from trans mountain diversions. About 25% of our water is what we call from the local system, and that's from snow melt on Pikes Peak and diversions on Monument Creek and Fountain Creek. So if 80% of our water is coming from trans mountain water, that's out of basin water. We're bringing that water into our basin. We then use that water, and then it goes down into our wastewater treatment plants or through storm runoff or something else like that. And we've actually added water to the system. Most of the time, that's in Colorado, the opposite has happened. Water has been taken out of the system. But in Fountain Creek's case, we've actually added water. So from a historical perspective, I always wondered, how was Fountain Creek accommodating the addition of water and adding water to the system? So this map right here is what I'm starting to work on. And it's looking at our modern day system, which the left map is from 2017 and the right is from 1947, and seeing the difference between the two. So can you guys still see this okay? There's a black and white map and a color map. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where I have to set a time limit because I could spend hours and hours doing this. Is what this is it's a swiper. It simply does the modern map, and then you can slowly swipe a historical map over the top, and you can see the changes historically speaking. And one thing I noticed is the increase in trees. With more water in the system, there's been a lot more vegetation on Fountain Creek. The other interesting thing is, I don't know what happened in 1947, but prior to that, there was a pretty good flood. We see a fair amount of flood scarring. So if you look down here below South Academy, we swipe it over, and you can see some pretty gnarly flood scarring in here where there was a pretty good flow event that happened. And so I've been looking at our geomorphology sites. Unfortunately, in this particular map, I only have 2 sites loaded up for historical, and it takes a heck of a lot of bandwidth. But we can come in here and look at our geomorphology sites and kind of get a feel for how they've changed over time. And I'm hoping to add more layers to this as well. Instead of just 2 years, add like 10 years of data in. Takes a lot of data, gets a little challenging. Where else is another interesting spot in this area? Trying to find Hansen Trail. If anybody's familiar with Hansen Trail. Oh, here's Fountain Creek Regional Park. This one's had some interesting changes as well. So this is, the nice thing about this too, is not just our little geomorphology sites, you can look at the whole creek. So here's modern day, and this is what this is looking like. And this is what it was historically. And again, you can see some really wild flood changes in here that today we don't have quite as much of. And there is more vegetation.
So does that mean in 1947 we were getting a heck of a lot more precipitation or more flooding events, even with like Waldo Canyon and all of that occurring?
The other thing, this is where it's getting really hard to tease out. That's a really good question. It's getting really hard to tease out changes. Because in 1947, we didn't have a city stormwater program. We didn't have a lot of these channel restoration programs or anything else like that. And so the floods have become, with climate change, everything has become more extreme forest fires, extreme flooding, and things like that. But we also have more things in place to help mitigate that, like city storm water, channel restoration, and things of that nature. So it's really been hard to tease out what happened when and the effects of that. So that's something I've been working on. I haven't quite wrapped my arms completely around it. But this little area right here, if anybody's familiar, this is the Hanson Trailhead, just north of the city of Fountain here. And what happened is this creek keeps getting taken out. The creek is really straight. It's pretty straight through here. It gains speed, and it runs into this terrace and bedrock, and it just whips around, and it just completely erodes all of this area over here. So there's actually an Army Corps of Engineer, El Paso County, City of Fountain, and the Fountain Creek District all chipped in money to actually restore this section of creek right here. And historically, it's interesting to see because this is a nice bend. Like, this is nice to see. This is in phase. Big sloping bends mean water can slow down, sedimentation can drop out. That's nice. But historically, you can see this really big oxbow over here. So you can see that historically, this whole area has just really struggled with finding its path across the prairie. And Fountain Creek is dynamic. It should move. It should not stay the same. We're not advocating for keeping the creek the same. We just want to understand how it moves. So this area has always been prone to these wild erosion events. There's a fair amount of vegetation in here, but then you come back here, you can still see the remnants of that old channel, but now you see it creating this terrible right angle down here as this bank has eroded. So the goal with this project is to make it look more like this, and to put the pedestrian bridge back, and it's going to get moved up a little bit, like up into this area. So this is the place we'd like to get back to, because it was in pretty good phase and pretty good alignment here. And this is what it looks like today. So this is an interesting project. If anybody's down in the area and wants to check it out, this project is underway right now. It actually should be finished late winter, early spring of this year. The other interesting thing is, let me zoom in real quick here and see where I'm running out of map. When I first visited this site right here, I was really concerned about that, the shale erosion, and that picture I had with the cottonwood that was hanging over. And I was like, oh man, that's just gonna, the creek could just keep eating away at this bank, and we could lose this land. There's some houses up here, some old historical barns, and it could really just keep eating away at it. Well, then I looked historically, and it has not moved. It's incredibly stable, and the stabilization is probably coming from this railroad track right here. The creek is forced due to the railroad, and they're really good at hardening structures. This railroad track is keeping the creek going right through this area, so it's actually provided a little bit of stability. It may not do so well for upstream here. It may have some influence there, but historically, this site actually has not changed. That cottonwood, it was there 50 years ago, and it's still here today, hanging off on the edge over here. The other interesting part of this section, those familiar with Jimmy Camp Creek, it's a major tributary of Fountain Creek, and it's had some serious major changes over the years. If I can get a good view here where you can see things. So here's Jimmy Camp Creek today. Here's the baseline flowing here. You can see there's a lot of vegetation, and you can't really see the creek that well because of the vegetation. But if you look back at the 1947, there was a major flood event that kind of scoured and pulled everything out. And what we're looking at here, I think, is more sand than water. Though it's kind of hard to tell from these old black and white photos. This is water, but this is sand. So there was a major event that went through here that really influenced Jimmy Camp Creek. Again, railroads are nice. Railroads make creeks always go through the same place. So you can see how Jimmy Camp Creek has changed over the years.
Hey, Annie.
Yes.
I just got the 10-minute warning, but I also had a question from Carrie. It says, would any of the flood evidence in 1947 be left from the big 1935 flood?
I've seen some evidence of the 1935 flood. I have historical photos that go up into Colorado Springs, like the city, and it's evident in Colorado Springs, the city, more than it is further down the creek. So we do still see some evidence of that, again, kind of the scouring that occurs when floods come through. And that's how Fountain Creek acts, is that Fountain Creek is like, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. A huge flood comes through, and it's like a reset. and then the creek refines its path, vegetation comes in, and then it's a huge reset. It happens on Fountain Creek historically about every 50 years. There'll be a big, large scouring flood event that resets the system. And creeks have more frequency of flooding, but Fountain Creek seems to save it all up and go all at once. So. And as far as the 10-minute warning goes, this is actually the end of my presentation. And this is where I have to set a time limit on the historical part, because I'll swipe forever. So if anybody wants to see something more, zoom into something, or has any questions.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can go ahead and put it in the chat. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask.
And if anybody's interested while they're thinking of a question, Google Earth, not Google Maps, but actual Google Earth has a time winder where you can actually look at like certain places year over year over year, because they've done aerial photographs for so many years. So sometimes I like to go on Google Earth and like look at my house and be like, house, no house, house, no house. So yeah, if anybody's kind of interested in these, if this is something you're into, I'm really into it. I could do this for hours. Yeah, check out Google Earth and their time series maps.
It looks like we have a question from Christine. Are tributary creeks in town also being monitored and managed?
Yes, they are. It is a little bit more on the city stormwater side, but we do have a bunch of sampling and analysis points. I don't know if my map shows it. I may have cut it out. We have a bunch of tributary sites monitored, and we monitor actually all the way from Monument all the way down. I hope you can see these sites a little bit more on this map here. This is all the way up at Palmer. And then we have all of these monitoring sites. The USGS monitoring sites, which Colorado Springs helps fund, all the way down here and all the way down the creek. And then city stormwater has more on the tributaries like Cottonwood Creek, Little Fountain Creek, and places like that. Sand Creek.
Yeah, there's been quite a bit of creek work by the Rockledge Ranch site, along with the FEMA. But I think that was city stormwater that was doing that.
Yeah, that was mostly city stormwater. So that was.
Okay, one more question. Is all of this information used for urbanization as well as for water conservation?
You mean to inform how urbanization is influencing the creek?
I believe.
This is exactly what it's intended to do, is we want to understand how is Fountain Creek accommodating us, if you will. It's a little workhorse. Little creek, it does a lot of work for us. It takes our stormwater, it takes our wastewater, and we need to take care of it because it's a little workhorse for us. And this is exactly what the geomorphology is looking to do. Because Colorado Springs and El Paso County has grown, we need to look and see how it's changing. And our creek restoration projects working? Is city stormwater working? Are we taking care of our water so it's a high quality water source? All of these things, and that's what this is intended to do. It takes a long time to get enough data to draw a lot of conclusions, though. So if I'm not saying a lot of conclusions, it's because we're still working on it. 10 years of geomorphology data, geologically speaking, is like not even the bat of an eye. So. Takes time.
Okay, well, I don't see any other questions right now. I just wanted to take this time to thank you, Annie, for the wonderful presentation. I learned something. At least I know what geomorphology means now, so that's a step in the right direction, and definitely looks like you're doing a lot of great work and putting in a lot of data into this, and I really enjoyed that swiping and looking at the historical pathways and the geomorphology of Fountain Creek, so I really appreciate that, Annie.
No problem. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.
Well, with that, we'll end this virtual presentation and look out for another presentation coming up October the 7th. That'll be by Birgit Landon. And I have that questionnaire out there, so I'm still trying to gather some more information on what we would like to have that presentation on of the 4 options that she provided. So I know some of you guys know Birgit. She's wonderful. She's an excellent presenter, so you guys will enjoy her. And then potentially later down the road, I think Annie has offered to present on some additional topics, so we might pursue that as well. And then I did meet with Irene Shonley with the Colorado State University Master Gardeners Extension, so I'm trying to work on some educational events provided from her group as well. So be on the lookout. And then, like I said, please, if you haven't RSVP to the luncheon, that link should be in your emails. So with that, I want to thank everybody. It was good to see everybody this morning, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Lance. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.